Yes, we all are happy that we could pay tribute and homage to such a revolutionary women of the Constituent Assembly. And also, I'm so happy that Dr. Mohan Gopal have put as a title of our program that she is the Dalit women founder of the Constitution. So it's a great new narrative which has been erased by the Article 16 group also. So, I was also referring to a few of the Constituent Assembly debates, and interestingly, I was finding out that once she was having an encounter recording between Mr. Churchill. So, Madam Dakshayani was saying that Mr. Churchill is going to improve, saying that they are going to improve the conditions of the Harijans. But what we want is a removal, immediate removal of our social disabilities. And she rightly pointed out that our freedom cannot be obtained from the British government only. And she rightly quoted that our freedom can be obtained only from Indians and not from the British government. So it's such a revolutionary statement that she had rightly pointed out that freedom within India is as important to the untouchable community of the India and the marginalized communities of India. And interestingly, the freedom from the forced labor was also an important contribution of her in the Constituent Assembly and regarding the Article 17 regarding the Untouchability Act. And one more interesting statement which I read yesterday is that of her, she told that the political parties are promising pieces of lands in order to make us as a vote bank. And how visionary is that statement? That's also great of her. So now I would like, before going to the panel discussion, I would like to invite Dr. Meera Velayudhan is with us. So she is a figure who has been engaged from the emergence of the women's studies or the gender studies from the 1980s onwards. And her doctoral research is linked with gender, caste, social reform, nationalism, and the popular movements in Kerala. And she has been also working on a global level, visibilizing the marginalized women also in the UN Advisory Discourse on Gender as Reuters in USA, and a great political analyst of our time. So with all the due respect, I request Dr. Meera Velayudhan to pay tribute to Dakshayani ma'am and to shower us with the inspiring contributions of Dakshayani. Over to Meera.
Thank you so much. When I got the invite, just the word Article 16 itself excited me, first of all. And because that's the whole, most of the conversations that we are conducting now, whether it's in gender studies or Dalit narratives or Dalit movement or Dalit women's movement, all these we are just, this is the kind of a frame of discussions, So I was really happy. The other thing was also like today being 4th, I didn't want it to be just a family affair, just commemorating in the family only. So I was really glad that we were having this webinar, and also I'd like to thank Dr. Mohan Gopal. I wanted to meet you, and so we had just small conversations, but this is just the beginning. And I'd like to be, of course, part of your forum. And in this, what I'm doing is that I've prepared the most comprehensive so far, whatever information that I have and data to put together my mother's life and works in the context of the theme that we are discussing today, as well as the framework of the Constitution. So I'll just put on this, I'll start off with the PowerPoint. Share. Open this. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Is
Yes,
it okay?
yes, ma'am. We can see it.
Okay, that is the beginning. So that's one of the early photographs. And whenever we discuss, it's about memory, where you are sort of reading a person's life, it can have many layers of meanings. And I found many, even international researchers doing women in the Constituent Assembly, sort of giving it different kind of frameworks. So there can be multiple frames of references, from say perspective of Dalit movement or Dalit women's movement or the constitution. But here it also, that contexts also vary. How do we read the period at that, the life and work at that time, in today's context, and the kind of relevance debates that we are sort of consider it relevant. And why I've always put forward her life or work whenever I've presented it in the framework of the Constitution, because that really is the challenge. And the also is to sort of locate our concerns within ongoing, and there are now newer constitutional conversations going on. So somewhat attempt to locate it in that kind of context. And I've taken from her, she's written an autobiography, and it's written in letterpad, and which has some chapterization has been outlined, because she was planning to bring out a book. And 56 points she's made, like 2-3 lines, the points, some of which don't really come into the full write-up. And it's not complete also. This was done for around 1976, 78, and I'd given, I gave this letter pad for her to write, uh, and it was very flimsy letter pad. Now I think of it, the paper was really flimsy, so I had a real problem to, preserve it and digitalize the whole thing. And so a lot of it I've used her own words. So she writes that the birth in 4th July 1912 in Kallachamuri house, it's in Ernakulam. She writes, because it's for an audience, she writes it's erstwhile Cochin and gives a kind of historical background. And she starts off by saying that we were not sort of born, I can't say I was born poor at that time, because the family had, they had a history of, from her father's side, there was this Aikara Yajaman. He was one of the titular heads of, by the Cochin Maharaja, of sort of 7 regions, Karas, of the community. So from the father's side, to the father's grand uncle, it's from that this kind of, there were these karas, these properties which were there. There were 7 of them, and one of the land that was there was occupied by her father. So she also says about the father being a school teacher, in the sense that most of them were had done up to, say, class 5 kind of thing, and the school being in the house itself. Otherwise, they basically, the male members were mostly, they were really experts in this granite work, in building and granite work. So which is why when Cochin was developing that, the contract work there was a lot of work given to the male members, because they specialized in this granite and stone in building various developmental activities. And she also describes the kind of house that was there, thatched one with wood and stones and carvings and other granary. But this is only for a very short time, because the family, it gets mortgaged very soon. I think by the time she was 3 or 4, it is already got mortgaged. And then she calls it there was she calls it matriarchal. It's matrilineal, but she called it matriarchal in the sense that from her father's father's maternal side is this property sort of came to the her father. And therefore the one of the compounds that and they sort of saying that how there was a certain status given to Aikara Yajaman at that time. And so therefore, that's why she said that they were, when she was born, she says, I can't say that I was born poor, but it all got mortgaged later and very soon. And the father's side, the father was actually also Kalari, I think Kalari very much that this Kalari within the Dalit communities, those Kalari Pura, that is something that comes out in her narrative, and how he used to use it against various opponents. He was quite a strapping, well-built father, and about caste abuse, mortgage, when the police came. So he sort of uses his Kalari, and there are some examples. There's not time to give here of these fights sort of going right up to the seaside and into the opponent sort of getting pushed into the sea. So there are those kind of thing. And then she also writes that how there are two sisters, her elder sister and herself, how the father liked the daughters because they lost two girls during, and the rest were all sons. So she says, I mean, she has an awareness of daughters. And the mother also worked in the, not only in the fields, but also dried fish. I think which is also quite this thing of Bolgati, because the fishing community, that Dalit Pulaya community is involved in fishing, I think that's a dimension we get from her narrative, because she also used to dry fish and then sell it off in the local fairs. And she remembers when that's her first memories when she was 3, and how she bit her father's hand to go along with her mother to this fair, because the mother was pregnant with the younger brother. So they were not allowing her to go, and she remembers that she then that and about she writes quite a bit about her mother's courage and in dealing with mortgage and the police or thieves. I think she sort of gives quite a lot of. Then she talks. There's a whole lot of which I have not given here. There's quite a lot she's written on the social customs over there, and they're quite following quite a lot of the matrilineal. How she herself was born when a separate hut was there in which for 10 days giving birth, and how the coconut leaf stem was sort of they make a sound with it when the child is born, and that's how. Then all about the puberty rites and ear piercing and bride price. And she says that her elder brother, she recalls her elder brother uh, having to wait to get married because there was no bride price to be paid, money to pay. And this way I've already said that the harbor getting built, and the male members earning over there through that. And that was the main sort of income. And her mother used to work in the fields, in the agricultural fields, labor. And this actually takes place, the Pulaya Mahjana Sabha, actually, which she writes about, is she is only about a year old that time. So most of the narrative that she gives is what her mother has told her. And her father dies also very early, when she was about 3 or 4. So the most of the history that she gives is from what her mother has told her in detail. And the Pulaya Mahajana Sabha, it's also, there are two interesting actually incidents involved with it. One is this that it was also the period when Ayangali was busy organizing in various regions where Dalits were being organized. And from what I've heard, that he also visited Bolgati, Mulavad also. And Pandit Karuppan was actually the leader of the forming this, but it is a broad base. If you see the names, there's at Krishna Menon, there's Pandit Karuppan, then of course two of my brothers of, and then Krishnedi, which was my grandfather's brother, Krishnedi. And he's actually was equally significant member at that time. But they also, the brothers and this, that time mostly social activities. It wasn't so much of a political thing, it was more of a social activity, like, cutting the hair and wearing shirts. And they used to compose. The family always had a a kind of cultural history to it, because they composed poems, songs, and conducted plays and so on, and that sort of still runs in the family. And that how, when they tried to assert at that time, after the Pulaya Mahjana Sabha was formed, that there were these, there were attacks from in Bolgati, it was mostly Latin Christians and Iroas, the more property Iroas, and there were these kind of resistance to them sort of overthrowing their caste sort of symbols. And but one thing that happens, and I think which I'd like to say here, is I think Krishnedi, who becomes John, there's a conversion, and the two elder brothers and the sister convert. And my mother and a younger brother Madhavan, they were not converted because they were getting these education in the school. So therefore, they were not converted. So half the family converted, and the rest. I mean, today it's like that. Part is Christian and part is Hindu. But I mean, everyone gets together in either church weddings or temple marriages. It's still there, but I think it was quite rare at that stage to have parts of a family converting and not all of them. And the mother also converted much later when her sister had to get married. And so the family, the boy's family said, how is it that you're sort of, what is this half Christian, half Hindu? So she also converted. And the Christianity, the conversion, very interesting thing that she tells is that Krishnedi actually had discussions with Sri Narayana Guru before the conversion in Trishur. There were some discussions and about the community, the sort of caste atrocities the community was facing, but then the conversion to Christianity took place. So I think there was some kind of intellectual kind of thinking of like which direction to take. And the also the what she says is that once a conversion took place, there were much more options of mobility particularly for the men and the women also, from walking on the road and drawing water and so on. And also she talks about the church. There's a church of St. John there, which is actually mostly only Pulayas go to that church. And it was actually it's built. It's a beautiful church that was built. Actually, the land is our ancestral home, the Kalachamuri house, and it's right on the seaside. The sea itself is there, and all the family members are buried there. The burial ground is there. Also, the church now there has only about at the most about 35 members, mostly related families of Pulaya Christians. But it's still, it's now comes under Church of South India. And that history, I was trying to get the history of the land records of that period, that because it belonged to Krishnedi, who became John. And that's why it is called St. John's Church. But the ownership at some stage, because of mortgage, went to the Church of South India. So therefore, there was this one side of the family was very sort of cut up to see that the documents have changed, and the original church, which was actually Krishnedi's, had contributed to setting it up. that name is no longer mentioned or signified. It's more the Church of South India that is known. So therefore, I think these are sort of histories that one needs to sort of bring out of worship, places of worship being their own spaces of worship being set up by the community by daily wages and land being contributed. So that old house no longer, the old church is no longer there. It's just dilapidated. Some bits are there, but the new church is there, and there's a lot of history to it. Also, the schooling, it was very interesting that my mother started pestering her mother to go to school when she was 3 itself. And she says she had a brilliant educational career. And that her mother took her to the school and said she was 5 years old. Because actually she was 3 and her height was also very small. And how they kept her in the same class for 2 years. And she would sleep and sometimes she'd wake up and then answer questions, which means she was following also what is happening, She was bright. And then she talks about the midday meal. There's a competition among boys and girls who sort of solves a maths question, can go first for the midday meal, and how they try to compete with the boys uh, for that. And then also, I think the thing about she says is that why it was difficult because she had to walk long distances. Once it sort of shifted to Ernakulam, they have to go by boat, and then it will take about 4 hours per day going and coming. And how also sometimes she was punished for arriving late because by the time the boat reaches, then you have to walk. So it's quite just getting that education itself, though the avenue was open, there was a lot of effort in sort of leaving and then walking and also studying at the same time. So, but she was always very confident of. She always says that she writes also that I would have done better if I didn't have to travel 4 hours per day. And also a very interesting thing is how the stipend that she and her brother got up to class 5 onwards, and then when going to college, that they used to sort of redeem the one part of the mortgage. So she sets up she and her brother set up their own unit family where her mother stops going for daily wages and they don't depend on the elder brother. So own family unit with mother and younger brother. So I think it's also how the family units get formed, the social mobility, and through the stipend and scholarship and chit fund that she talks about, that they manage to redeem and form a family unit, And I think these are interesting sort of struggles and histories of mobility and how, in that context, how you study also. And the entrance to college is very interesting, and my elder brother has written about it. In fact, the whole island was very happy, and she was sort of everyone. She left to attend Maharajas college. They were all outside the house clapping, and then she entered the college. But there was a media presence there because the first one from the community, but they didn't notice her going because they sort of had some idea of what she might look like, and probably she didn't look like what they thought was a stereotype. Pulaya woman going in. So later on, they found her in the chemistry lab, and she was the only science woman. That's also a first, also a science woman from the community, and in her class, the only girl in BSc science. And she also said that generally she was accepted, but there was a teacher uh, who showed the experiments in the lab, but she had to sort of she had to learn from a distance, But she said that she overcame it and graduated with a high second class in 1935. And I had interviewed K.R. Gauri, the late K.R. Gauri, for my own oral histories, and she also remembers them sharing this assembly sadhanam. That, and this is very important because I think this also shows the kind of intellectual and other movements which sort of interact with each other. You know, anti-caste movements or social reform movements, how they intersect. And therefore that this is very significant because for even for Dalit movements, you know, there are other kind of conversations going on among different communities, you know, and how it's important to respond to that. And not only just your own narrative. So I think this SNV Sadanam, which was the SNDP institution where she was able to stay, and it was not only just a hostel. It was also where many lectures took place. There was a library there and many activities. So it was a different kind of hub for different kind of ideas and different people coming and speaking. And to when I think that where did she get these? She spoke about this. Where did she get these ideas from? So obviously there's a lot that was taken from the different kind of movements that are going on, and they which sort of interacted and intersected, across castes and within castes. Those kind of conversations had an impact on her. So because her readings were very wide, and this whole entry into the college, my elder brother, late brother, actually writes because he spent a lot of his time in Kerala. So he writes how gives a little more thing and how the media covered it, and he says that she had become a celebrity, and there was news coverage of entering the college. And I think teaching, I didn't write it here, actually, she goes for a teacher's training course in Madras. And after the teacher's training, the course, then she's posted in it's actually in Trishur area, a high school. And she's given a higher grade because of her achievements, as well as being the first woman from the community to get a graduation degree. So therefore, she was given a higher sort of grade in her teaching, and she sort of says that she also demanded that she get a higher grade to the department, the education department. So I think she was always aware of sort of demanding what she felt was her due, what is due to her, and which was, she should access it. And with KP Vallan, who's a MLC, they sort of travel by train to join that school and to stay in that area. And she was posted in that area because it was predominantly an Irava dominated area, and there were expected to be less of caste sort of opposition. And she gives quite a lot of details about the Irava community over there, and how they rent a place over there, and in one of the thing where she was not allowed to draw water though from the well, then her mother, who was a Christian, came to stay with her, and she could draw water from the well. She also writes in details about a lot of these customs which the Irava community used to follow, about witchcraft, Buddhism, and many other kind of. So she said not all of them are enlightened. She used the words enlightened. So it also gives an insight that the Irava social reform movement, how far, this is mid 1930s, how far did all the ending of these customs, whether it's puberty rights and all, how far did it really reach? So I think that's a very interesting thing that needs to be, because we assume that it's affected everybody and people had changed, and why some of these are reviving now in sort of very commercial forms. So I think when we read what she writes in detail, she's written quite a lot on the customs that they follow, and she said they were not enlightened enough. So I think that's a social sort of commentary. And then, of course, there are a lot of assertions in her life that she does is about like going to the school going through a road and with fields on both sides, and a Nair woman coming from the opposite side, and she refused to move away. And finally, the Nair woman had to sort of go into the field, and that woman says that we have to walk on these dirty fields, because it was the edges of the fields were used for as open sort of latrines. And so I think that's one of her earliest kind of assertions that she talks about. And also the teaching also, she says that they seem to, after initial inhibition, to seem to accept me. And this is another, she has a male teacher used to throw the notebooks and she would refuse to catch it. Finally, he tried to throw it, and finally he was forced to sort of start handing it over to her. And there are also other kind of occasions, a teachers' conference. So obviously she attended some teachers' conferences where chairs were kept separately for different communities, and she boycotted that because these chairs were sort of kept separately. And then also she says about political, so that's the first time she says that she was, she was like linked with, she had ideas of the Gandhian movement. And there was this boycott going on, and she says that she could not, they were very strict that anybody who went observe, teaching people who observed boycott would be thrown out of their jobs. And she was paying up all these mortgages and all this different kind of uh, dues that were there, and also maintaining the family. So she says, but at the same time, the students understood, and she was told to give a speech in one of the literary union. They have a literary forum there. And she says she doesn't say exactly what she said, but she said that she gave a speech in such a way that the students understood, that they knew that I was a Gandhian, and that they understood why she could not go, but maybe she just put it across in a different manner. I think that's very important, is how you put across in the face of, you're having certain barriers, how do you put across your ideas? I think that was a very important kind of, lesson that we learn, is that when we have certain restrictions, then how do you sort of put across ideas? These are different ways of putting across. She also talks about getting transferred to different kind of schools where the casteism was stronger. In fact, in one place, one of the consorts of the Maharaja was the principal also. And some were older than her also, and some of the students that she was teaching were even from the dominant communities were also older than her. And there's also there's one thing which I think is very important, that she said she used to these meetings. She didn't have so much of time for meetings except when was invited by the communities. And she talks about Parur and Palghat, and which she recalls, but she says that she always had a kind of fear of failure sometimes, and there used to be a fainting which took place. She gives two incidents. One when she was, I think, just before her SSLC, that one of the exams, algebra exam, and she just couldn't solve the sum, and she sort of fell down fainting. Then she repeated that exam and got over 90%. And so, but she also says that this before addressing a meeting, also she used to have this kind of, whether she would do well, or whether, this fear of failure. I think this is very much there among all our communities. This kind of thing that you have to perform. And how do you do well? If you have confidence, do well, and then you are always being, being gauged. But she said that when she went to the Cochin Legislative Council and Constituent Assembly, there was no longer any no such fear of any such thing took place. So I think it's also for me, for me also that I'm just the opposite. I was very, because of her, I was very relaxed exam time. And in fact, I find it difficult to sit up and study also late. And my mother would put some tea or something, but I'd just fall asleep, and then in the morning just fine. So I think that confidence which I got from her is there. So I didn't have this fear of failure or whether I'll perform well or not. And I think that came from her sort of giving confidence and sometimes sort of, you know, patting me on my shoulder and the back and saying, sit up straight, walk straight. So I think those are important kind of that you learn from a person, interacting from a person as well as from their lives, that you need to stand straight. And she had this kind of this bone behind the neck. There was a bit, she said, because they used to walk with the face down, that bone was a little, bent. And therefore, she used to always ping me on my back and the neck, and when I was reading, to say, sit up, and sit straight. So I think that these are sort of saying that you be bold and don't bend. So I think these are important sort of experiences. And also the marriage, of course, is very interesting because the Indian National Congress was having its working committee meeting during the break that this wedding took place, where Gandhiji and Kasturba, she wore a white sari with a red border. That's lying with me. It's very old. And the leper officiated as the priest. And she said that, we have no information on how they reached Wardha. Gandhi, it was quite a long journey from Kochi to go to Wardha. And so I don't know how she traveled. And she also used to get travel sickness in bus and long distance, like me. And so only train, I think, was the one she could travel by. So, but they went there for their wedding, and so which means they were part of the Gandhian movement at that stage. And also that she could not bear the food over there because Gandhian ashrams have this chapatis and jaggery and so on. And Gandhiji asked her that, if you want to cook non-veg, you would cook in your own hut, because they were given a separate hut after marriage. So then she said it's a big hassle. This cooking itself is a big hassle because lighting what is called the itself is so it's better to just bear up with the common kitchen for a while. And this is the photograph. This actually is a picture drawn from a photograph, and which I sort of got by chance because I went I was living in Gujarat and went to the Sabarmati ashram, and there was this exhibition, and then there was a wall at that stage where this picture was drawn. And then I went to the library, and then they gave this card, the picture postcard. So this actually, the photograph was there in the exhibition. There's an exhibition of the freedom struggle and Gandhiji, that this photograph was there. But recently when I went there, that photograph is not there. They've taken away many of these photographs. So I don't know where the photograph is. It's not. Wardha also I checked, it was there. It's not there any longer. So probably some of these histories have been removed. And this actually took place in a hut. So the picture is drawn outside. It was actually in a hut that took place. And I think one of the things that they learned in the ashram is doing everything on your own. So we as children from childhood, we all had to do our own things. There was nothing like my mother was washing clothes or somebody was doing. Everyone had to do their own work. And I think that was something that, cleaning ourselves, everything. And a lot of course, my eldest brother did a lot of the work for me, also being the only girl, and also for the younger brothers. He did a lot of the work, but most of it we had to do ourselves. I think the self-reliance and able to do your own, not depend, is very much that was carried forward, and from that tradition. And also, it's very interesting that very soon after the marriage, only that this Cochin Legislative Council, which she terms it, this is how I entered politics. So she has a different definition that she's entering formal politics. When she enters the Cochin Legislative Council, and it's very interesting. She said that she went to the education department and said that I want to contest. No, I want to put in my papers for nomination because 3 seats are there for from the communities, untouchable communities, and the officer there says that no, but you have to give up your work. So it's only after marriage that when they both have he has an income also, that she was able to join the Cochin Legislative Council. And it was, she does not write too much about it, but there are some speeches which are available. And she spoke in English, and I think this is very different. She spoke for proportional representation, which is a different narrative from reservation debate. So she puts that forward there, and then she talks about, you know, different funds coming to the communities, about reservation in panchayats and municipalities, and called untouchability inhuman. These speeches you can find in the Legislative Council debates and all. And she said that this whole word Harijan was meaningless. It's like calling dogs Napoleon if these disabilities were not removed. I mean, some people will take offense to it, but this is what she said. So quite strong kind of. And also, I think this I've tried very hard to get data. I've not been able to get it all because in Tamil Nadu, in Madras, all the labor, the studies that have been done on labor, this history, the Dalit communities were called backward classes. And there were a whole lot of organizations which were there. And she says she was a general secretary and president of many of them in Madras because my father was there working as a labor welfare officer. So she says that she also at that time edited a magazine, which was actually an Indian National Congress magazine towards common man. This I found 2 leaflets in the one of the libraries, and it's a kind of Gandhi versus Ambedkar, but it's a very interesting document because it doesn't really attack Baba Sahib. It just says that the point it makes is that he has political intentions. So it's not really an attack on his ideas on caste, but more about how he has political ideas. So I think it is a very interesting way of, debating at that time. So probably, there were these different kind of thinking going on, and this magazine, which was there. This is the Constituent Assembly. Both of them have father accompanied with one of the children who was brothers who was 6 months old. And she went to Delhi to join the Constituent Assembly. And she calls it, she says, my election to the Constituent Assembly was interesting and historical. In fact, she uses this twice, this historical, when she joins the Cochin Legislative Council and a marriage, and then this Constituent Assembly. She keeps saying it's historical. So there's an awareness of that she is making some mark and initiating some different trend. That awareness, I think, was there. And there was a contest in this very interesting contest took place in the voting, and in the second round voting that she won. And she said there was one of the, I think it was from the Justice Party, which is also an anti-caste movement who stood against her from Madras, and that person went on a hunger strike. She says later on he became a member in the provisional parliament, and she met him, and they became friends. And then only that she realized that he had gone on a fast against this her nomination to the Constituent Assembly. So she's able to actually relate to people who opposed her and from an opposing political trend, that and able to start linking up with these different kind of people from different organizations who are working in the anti. So she sort of overcomes these kind of barriers. And also these are the women members. This is her here, and the youngest. The others were much, much older. She was only 34 years old. So, and she was having children who were being born. So therefore, that was also unique in the sense that most of these them were much, much older. And her friend was this Durgabai Deshmukh here, and Annie Masgrave. These were very close friends of hers. So I think it's very important when you look at the women in the Constituent Assembly and when you pick up the speeches, it's important to see how they all came. These women came from very different kind of regions and political movements and also institution building that went on, whether it's Durgabai Deshmukh or Annie or Ammu Swaminathan, that's Ammu Swaminathan and so therefore, how Sucheta Kriplani, who became the Chief Minister of UP later on, and how, I think what Dr. Gopal said in the introduction, how these conversations, because I think, including my mother and others, I think they sort of crossed many bridges because they worked together. They came from so many different political persuasion, but their debates and the kind of speeches that they made, there were a lot of unity in the kind of issues that they were putting forward, whether it's for women's education or property rights or ending bonded labor, these different kind of things. So I think they sort of, it's like they were negotiating citizenship through their ideas. So I think all these women, because many of them worked together, and there was a kind of, and if you read the speeches, there's really no opposition to each other. These women, when they're speaking, if you see the speeches, they don't oppose each other. And it's very interesting, and they all give very distinct speeches. So I think, the idea of this ideas of equality and freedoms and opportunities, these sort of come into the principles, the article equality and these articles, different articles which equality, non-discrimination, these come through these sort of contribution of these women. There were actually 16 of them. Here, all of them are not there in the photograph. There were 16 of them. And so I think that's very important where in negotiating citizenship and when putting ideas which become core principles of the constitution. I think the women, they work together also, and they also had their specific contribution, like my mother spoke on various things. Then I think the very idea that, of course, her first speech was about slavery. And she says that how Nehru came up to her and congratulated her on her speech and to the anti-slavery speech that she gave. But I think most important, and it's also very key to this Article 16, is this where she says that the Constitution should have a new framework for a new framework for life. And there has to be moral safeguards that give real protection to the underdogs of India. It's not an easy task. We need a new foundation which needs a planner. Planner is Baba Sahib. And what we want is not all kinds of, it is a moral safeguards that give us real protection. What we want is immediate removal of our social disabilities. Our freedom cannot be obtained only from, no, actually it should be, can be obtained only from Indians and not from British government. So I think that, here also is also, it's also articulating what Baba Sahib Ambedkar said about the, about about moralities, constitutional morality. And I think in some way it's a new framework for life, this constitutional morality. This is what sort of makes uh, I think distinguishes the Indian constitution from many of the the social orders of the colonial and pre-colonial. I mean, because you're having a new framework for life and renewing people on a new foundation, where the marginalized are given protection. This is a new kind of morality also. So I think the constitutional morality is very much integral to this kind of thinking that was going on, and it is key to this Article 16 too, and also of freedoms, different kind of freedoms. And also one needs to see it in terms of the intersections, the intersectionality of the different principles of the Constitution. And I think that's very important because when you see the whole debate on the Constituent Assembly and her speeches, there, you have to see it at the intersection of different elements of different articles. For instance, if there's violence that takes place, you not only see it as, you have to see it in different articles of the Constitution to be able to respond to that legally. And so the intersectional reading of these articles and their interpretation and in the law is very important. I think this sort of comes out when I was sort of reading these speeches. And also about, she calls it a fascistic social structure and an economic revolution you need to enforce labor, and also, compares it with sort of for getting respect and self-respect and dignity. And then the speech on slavery and labor, she says, I mean, there is, this whole, she held her own views, of course, but and also including, I think, which nobody has put there, is that the draft constitution should be put before the people in the first general election to see whether the people agree with the draft constitution. I think that's a very significant kind of remark. It's the Constituent Assembly, and yeah, that's her and Durgabai Deshmukh, Ammu Swaminathan, that the photograph. Um, And she also, I mean, I haven't given in details, but she also, because she traveled to Delhi, which is cold, and when the Constituent Assembly was formed and the first meeting took place, and she writes quite a bit about managing the children and household expenses, and she also had a child, and that she had to go back to Malavuad to have a child. My younger brother was born there in the house. And I was the only one born in Delhi in a hospital. The others were all born in these homes. And she also, during that time, the late President K.R. Narayanan actually was my father's nephew, and she, with her money from earnings from the assembly, she gave him barked him to buy clothes when he went to LSE for his education, as well as some pocket money when he went there. And her speeches are they're available, of course, and she says, I think here it's very important because people, it's not that she has, I think what Professor Dr. Gopal said is about, her able to address different sides of different ideas and different sort of platforms who are within the Constituent Assembly. I think that is right. So she talks about where she says that it's not very easy, and I think this is very important. What she supports Baba Sahib Ambedkar in that draft constitution. She says, you cannot expect him to deliver when it takes place under the broad, context of transfer of power. So all the transfer of power, all the issues that are related to it also impact constitution building. And I think that's a very important point. Not many people have made it, that how, for instance, transfer of power and partition, these impact the constitution building, and so criticism leveled against him is totally uncharitable and undeserved, even if there is any blame. And then she does say that there are some points in the constitution which she drafts that she disagreed with, and one of it is a centralization. And she talks about decentralization. In fact, it's only at the end of the drafting, the last stage, that even Panchayati Raj gets discussed at all. And then the federal element, which sort of comes in one line in one of the amendments that is brought in much later, when the final drafting is taking place and responses are there. So she said that decentralization very much, that is her arguments about this one man, one vote. Is her point is about decentralization and federal. So her frame of reference is different in terms of how she responds to that one man, one vote thing. Is she sees in terms of what happens in the villages, and the influence, obviously, of the influence of Gandhi is there also, but her own idea about federal rights and what happens in decentralized should not get centralized as it is in the 1935 Act. So she compares it with the Colonial Act as well, as that some of those changes have not taken place. At the same time, she says that transfer of power created that kind of framework for not able to address many of these, go beyond many of these things. And this, of course, this is very interesting because she, in the beginning itself, wanted a resolution and a law abolishing untouchability. This is in her first speech itself. And then, because she was part of the Indian National Congress, the Nehru told her that, which she has written about also, and it's there in the speech itself, that how he said that this is to be discussed within the party, and it will be a broader principle within the constitution. I think this is very significant, because if you have a law against untouchability, and when did our atrocities law take place? It took place much later, and a decade or so after we became a republic. So she said that she wanted this resolution to be brought immediately, and that it would also, send a signal to the people that our intention of the new dispensation is to, but she was told that it will be part of the principles, and it should be something that should be discussed within the Congress Working Committee, and that untouchability should be made unlawful. And she approached Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and he said that it's not a Congress committee meeting where you're moving this resolution, she also sort of links it up with apartheid. She said that, it will have a great effect. Even people in South Africa were chastising us because we have this practice here, and how international, in that speech, she said international criticism will come about because we are still having these practices. And then the Constituent Assembly becomes a provisional parliament, and where my father comes as a nominated member from the International Congress, and he sort of leaves it in 3 months and joins Lohia Socialists after 3 months. And there's some pressure on her from the Congress Working Committee to make him back, because the reason why he said is that one is, I think, some repression in Kerala that took place. And the other thing is that also that he said that what Nehru said, that why did he say that the Congress is corrupt? He could have said the government is corrupt, but why did he say the Congress is also corrupt? So I think there were some exchanges, and Lohia, there was some kind of oppositional very few. There was only one Muslim League member who was in the opposition. So actually, he went into an opposition which really did not have many members at that stage. So it was kind of a lone of his voice at that stage. And then she also speaks about she gives lots of questions she asks about various, and she liked to prepare these starred questions and in fact, members sitting next to her and saying, "Why are you always asking questions?" She said, "I like to ask questions and put issues across." And because my father leaves the Indian National Congress and joins the Socialists, they were actually in opposing political parties. She remained in the Indian National Congress and he was with the Socialists. So actually they were in two sides in the parliament. A couple were in two kind of different political parties. She remained with her ideas and he remained with his. And yet they lived together. So also that there were a lot of, it is very interesting because there are many things they did in common together, which was outside work, outside the parliament. And this is about, you know, I think she introduces, because she had visited China, she introduces Chawinlai to Lady Mountbatten. And I think it's probably a function in the Chinese embassy at that stage, because the non-aligned movement was taking place. So this photograph is of that period. And she, in the 50s, after the provisional parliament and then the elections to the next first parliament takes place, then she decides to leave this formal kind of politics because the children are there. So she joins this Lakshmi, becomes a LIC as an officer, publicity officer, and she remained that till 21 years. There was no promotion or anything. But there were a lot of social activities. Almost all of this Delhi area rehabilitation, whether it's Janpath or Defense Colony or any of these areas, all the refugee rehabilitation, she was in that parliamentary committee. So and they were also, I think, the president and secretary of the Traders Association of Janpath. And in fact, once when I went there, somebody recognized me by my hair and said that this hair is like your father's, was he so and so, he gave us these shops to distribute. So I mean, there were many. So he was. They did a lot of work of that post-partition. And there are many stories that, in fact, many Muslim households stayed in the house in the parliamentary when they were in the provisional parliament. In that house, they were in the outhouse. There were several families, Muslim families, because of the post-partition living there, and so we sort of grew up with some of them. And then also there were these circus artists from Kerala and Kadari here for the insurance, taking sort of appeals to the government. And Tibetans, resettling Tibetans, and shoeshine boys came, wanting bank support for their box and the shoe boxes, and Chinese shopkeepers and so on. So I think they did a lot of this work there. And also, I think she continues with this work outside and very intense mm, work, social, what is called, this is actually really called constructive work, because there's no economic, there's no funding or anything. You just go to an area and you work among sweeper community, and then there's dialogues. I think it's through the Tibetans that there's this dialogue started with Buddhist priests and Buddhist monks coming to the house, and there were constant interaction with the Buddhist, particularly the Tibetan Buddhists, and also some other. It's also part of, I think, engaging intellectually with different kind of thinking, because I think there's a disappointment with the Nehruvian ethos at that stage, and she writes how children's education, because of her activities, both parliamentary and children's education affected. And it's only with the eldest son, my eldest brother becoming a doctor, that the economic stress. I mean, there was never really had any money or any property or anything. Just these activities were carried on, and then in the 70s, I think this is quite a pioneering kind of activity. The Ambedkarite women, including wives of the five Ambedkarite, Baba Saheb Ambedkar sent five students abroad, including some engineers to study abroad, and they came back. And some of them, the women from those households, the wives, and they formed a kind of they got together and decided to hold a national kind of meeting of Dalit women in 1978, early 78. And it had also, very these key people in it. This Kaushalya Baisantri, she was actually a secretary of Women's Ambedkar Student Front, and she was settled in Delhi. Then there was Kumud Pavade, who's a well-known Dalit woman writer from Maharashtra, part of the Dalit women's writings. And there was younger Jyoti Lanjewar. These are all women, sort of Dalit women's movement sort of emerging from, distinct from the Dalit movements, having their own voice. Sort of they hold a kind of, they hold a national conference, and then an organization is formed, a federation, Mahila Jagrati Parishad. Then most of their work was in the slum areas where they worked. And she was the president. She became the president and the secretary. And it was among the sweeper women, their skills and literacy. And so, I mean, this is how she passed away in 1978. But these are the sort of activities that she was involved in. And she always regretted leaving Kerala. I remember one visit we made when I was in school girl to Kerala, because I was in a boarding school in North India. And she cried everywhere we went to visit family members. She was crying. And so I think maybe why I've come here finally is maybe it has got something to do with the fact that she regretted having left Kerala. And there are these, she have four brothers, and this is the only family photograph we have of was taken place in Delhi. And that is the four sons and me as a daughter. And there's one thing I think which nobody knows, and which I've brought it out first time in your platform. She gave a speech on Ambedkar's birth anniversary, and I think it might be 1977 or 76, 77 period, where the students, Ambedkarite students, invited her for a speech. It's a handwritten speech, and it's that she, I mean, I didn't know about this till I saw this handwritten pages of her writing of the speech which she was had given, and that she had spoken in JNU. And so I think the JNU should also know. And she writes that how, all his contributions she puts forward, and how she had the opportunity to, even when he was law minister in the provisional parliament and Hindu code bill, and that when Manu declared that there should be no freedom of for women, it was Dr. Baba Saheb who brought revolutionary changes in Hindu society through the Hindu code bill. He gave Hindu women the right to father's property. He made changes in adoption laws. He made laws to save widows from oppression, and then adoption of being able to adopt. And this also made it, all these, he said his speeches were very clear, and he put forward his argument. His interpretation of laws was so clear that anybody could understand them. And then this is also not known also that that there is how she also edited Earlier, she was in that Common Man, which was a Gandhi and Ambedkar debate. She was the editor. She also became editor, managing editor in Madras of Jai Bhim. And the late Shivraj, I think he was from the Justice Party, and how she was the editor of that. I've tried very hard to get, but no, I could not been able to get any of the copies of this. Maybe it just came, one or two issues came out, but nobody seemed to have a copy of that. And in 1945-46, she said, how many of you know that I was managing editor of Jai Bhim from Madras, and Sri Shivraj was the editor. And then he goes to praise how the greatest, praising Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and how, how virulent Orthodox Hinduism he fought, and he chose the path of Buddhism with his followers. I don't think she agreed with the conversion as such, but at the same time, she said that he chose this path. And it was my good fortune, but I can't say it's my good fortune, but I was able to attend his funeral with thousands of his followers and admirers could not. And we are failing in our duty if we just simply celebrate his birth and death anniversary. It is our bounden duty of the educated to fight against caste. We should not feel that we are inferior to anybody. So I think I'll sort of end with this, because I think this brings people who sort of take up one or two lines from the assembly debates and do not see that she lived up to 1978 and there were other changes in her thinking and her ideas, and how there were different kind of modernities you see in her whole life and work, which are sort of impacting her life. So I think to put it against any one, uh, only one particular line of thinking or just another one altogether would not be right. So thank you for allowing me to put this before you. Thank